Title: Roots of Riches. Chapter 1. The beginning. Our story begins in the tiny, time-worn village of Harwood. In a modest cottage, on a particularly stormy night, James Beaumont was born, a squalling bundle of joy whose entrance into the world was heralded by a leaky roof and a cow mooing indignantly outside. The Beaumont family, despite their modest means, was rich in laughter, love, and a shared knack for finding humor in even the direst circumstances. "If only our pockets were as full as your cries, little one," his father, Robert, chuckled, cradling his newborn son in his arms. James grew up amidst a loving family, consisting of his mother, Marie, and his two elder siblings, Emily and Thomas. The family lived a simple life, but the Beaumonts were never short on imagination. "We may not have gold, but we have hearts of gold," Marie often said, instilling in her children a sense of warmth and positivity. It was their ability to find joy in the simplest things that made the family strong, even in the face of hardship. From an early age, James developed an insatiable curiosity about the world. He would sit under the stars at night, wondering what lay beyond the fields of Harwood. "I want to see the world, Mama," James would say with wide eyes. His mother smiled, stroking his curly hair. "The world's big, my love, but never forget where your roots are. This little home will always be a part of you." James would nod, not fully understanding the depth of her words at the time. As James grew older, so did the family's financial struggles. Robert's carpentry business was failing, and Emily had to give up her dreams of studying to work in a nearby mill. But still, the family found ways to laugh through the pain. "We might be poor, but at least we have each other," Thomas would say with a grin. The Beaumont family became a symbol of resilience in their village, always willing to help others despite their own hardships. But deep inside, James carried a fiery desire to escape poverty and make something of himself. He didn't know how or when, but one thing was certain: he was going to change the fate of his family. And so, with hope in his heart and humor as his shield, James set his sights on the future, ready to navigate the rocky road ahead. Chapter 2. The early struggles. As James entered his teenage years, the weight of his family's financial situation grew heavier on his shoulders. The Beaumont family's laughter still filled their small home, but the cracks in the walls, both literal and metaphorical, were becoming more apparent. "If we laugh loud enough, the walls won't hear themselves crumble," Robert would say with a wink. But even his humor couldn't hide the desperation in his eyes. James began working odd jobs around the village, doing everything from mucking out stables to helping old Mrs. Willow with her overgrown garden. One day, as he was hauling a particularly stubborn cart of potatoes, Thomas appeared beside him with a grin. "You're as strong as an ox, James. If only we could plow our way out of this poverty as easily as we turn these fields." James laughed, wiping sweat from his brow. "Maybe we need a magic cow. I hear they sell them at the next village." It was moments like these, a light-hearted banter with his brother, that kept James going. But despite the jokes, there was no escaping the harsh reality of their situation. Robert's health was deteriorating, and the once busy carpenter's shop now stood silent. Marie took up laundry work for wealthier families, often coming home with her hands red and raw from the soap. "We'll be all right, James," she would say, pressing a kiss to his forehead. "Life is like a bad play sometimes, but the show must go on." James tried to keep the laughter alive, but he couldn't help but feel a growing frustration. He wanted more for his family, more than this cycle of poverty and struggle. One night, After a particularly tough day of work, James sat on the hill overlooking the village, his heart heavy. Thomas joined him, sitting quietly for a moment before speaking. "You know, James, we're all born into something. But it's up to us to decide if we stay there." Those words stayed with James. He began thinking about ways to change their fortunes. "I'll make us rich, Thomas," James declared, his voice filled with determination. "Not just in laughter, but in everything else, too." Thomas clapped his brother on the back. "Then let's start tomorrow. But for tonight, let's just enjoy the stars. They don't cost a thing." And so, the two brothers sat in silence, dreaming of a brighter future under the night sky. Chapter 3, Leaving home. When James turned 18, the time had come for him to leave Harwood in search of opportunities. The village, with all its charm and familiarity, felt too small for his dreams. "You'll be back, won't you?" Emily asked, her voice trembling. "Of course," James replied, pulling her into a hug. "But I need to find something more. For all of us." His mother, standing at the door with a tear in her eye, handed him a small package. "It's a little food for the journey. And a little love to keep you warm," she said softly. James set off for the city with nothing but a worn bag and a heart full of hope. As he walked away from the village, he heard his father's voice in the wind, "Remember, James, a smile costs nothing but can be worth everything." James smiled, vowing to carry his father's wisdom with him wherever he went. The road ahead was long, but his determination was strong. Upon arriving in the bustling city of Norchester, James was overwhelmed by its size and energy. The towering buildings, the crowded streets, it was a world completely unlike Harwood. "Well, here we are, James Beaumont," he said to himself. "Time to find out if city folk laugh as hard as we do." But life in the city wasn't easy. Jobs were hard to come by, and many nights, James found himself sleeping in alleys or on park benches. Still, he refused to give up. "There's always something to smile about," he would remind himself, even on the toughest days. After weeks of searching, James finally landed a job as an apprentice in a local print shop. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The shop's owner, Mr. Finn, was a gruff old man with a soft spot for hard workers. "You've got determination, boy," Mr. Finn said one day. "Reminds me of myself when I was younger minus the jokes. But keep that humor. It'll get you further than you think." James took the advice to heart. He worked tirelessly, learning the trade and earning the respect of his coworkers. "I may be printing papers today," he told himself one night, "but one day, I'll be printing my own fortune." The city was tough, but James was tougher. With each passing day, he felt a step closer to his dreams of providing a better life for his family. Chapter 4, Rising through the ranks. As the months went by, James' hard work and positive attitude caught the attention of more than just Mr. Finn. Customers began requesting him by name, and he was soon promoted to manager of the print shop. "You've got a head for business and a heart for people," Mr. Finn said proudly. "Not many can do both." James felt a sense of pride and accomplishment, but he knew this was only the beginning. In his free time, James began studying business and economics, determined to learn everything he could about making money. He knew that understanding the way the world worked was key to changing his family's fortunes. "Knowledge is the best investment," he often said to himself, poring over books late into the night. His hunger for success was matched only by his desire to return home and lift his family out of poverty. One day, While delivering papers to a wealthy businessman, James overheard a conversation about an upcoming investment opportunity. "If only we had a stake in that," one of the men said. "It's bound to make millions." James' ears perked up. He had been saving every penny he could from his wages, and now he saw a chance to make something more of it. After gathering all the information he could, James decided to take a risk. He pooled his savings and invested in the project. "Here goes nothing," he whispered to himself as he handed over the money. The weeks that followed were nerve-wracking, but James kept a calm exterior, using humor to ease his anxiety. "If it all goes wrong, at least I can say I gambled like a king," he joked to Mr. Finn, though his heart pounded with fear. Then, one morning, everything changed. The investment paid off, and James found himself with more money than he had ever imagined. He couldn't believe it. "I did it," he whispered in disbelief. "I actually did it." But as the wealth poured in, James realized that money alone wasn't what he had been chasing. It was the promise of a better life for himself and for his family. Chapter 5, A Homecoming with his newfound fortune. James wasted no time in returning to Harwood. He had written to his family, but nothing could have prepared them for his arrival. When he stepped through the front door, looking every bit the wealthy man he had become, Emily dropped the basket of apples she had been holding. "James?" she gasped, tears filling her eyes. "Is it really you?" James smiled and spread his arms wide. "The one and only!" he exclaimed, pulling his sister into a hug. His mother, upon seeing him, rushed forward, her hands trembling. "You've come back," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "And you've done it." James held her close, feeling the warmth of home wash over him. "I told you I would, Mama. But I could never have done it without the strength you all gave me." The family gathered around, marveling at how far James had come. Robert, though frail, managed to stand and give his son a proud smile. "I always knew you'd make something of yourself, James. But no matter how rich you are, never forget that wealth isn't just about money. It's about love, laughter, and family." James nodded, feeling the truth of his father's words deep in his heart. The Beaumont family was no longer poor, but they were still the same at their core, full of love, humor, and an unbreakable bond. As they sat down for dinner that night, James couldn't help but laugh. "We may be rich now," he said with a grin, "but I bet our jokes will still be as bad as ever." The room erupted in laughter, and for the first time in a long time, James felt truly at peace. And so, the boy who had once dreamed of a better life had not only achieved it but had also learned that true wealth lies in the bonds we share with the people we love. Chapter 6, Rebuilding Harwood. James didn't just return home to flaunt his success, he came back with a mission. Harwood, his beloved village, had seen better days. The worn-out buildings, the struggling families, and the empty shops reminded James of his childhood, a time when laughter was the only thing that kept them afloat. Now, he had the means to make a real difference, and he wasn't about to let the opportunity slip by. One morning, James stood in the village square, looking around at the familiar faces of his neighbors, people he had known all his life. "What do you reckon we rebuild this place from the ground up?" he said aloud, causing heads to turn. Old Mr. Smithers, who had lived in Harwood longer than anyone could remember, chuckled. "Ah, James, always the dreamer," he said, shaking his head. "But dreams don't build walls, my boy." James grinned. "No, but money does. And I've got plenty of that now." There was a stunned silence before the crowd burst into excited whispers. "He's serious," someone said. "He's really going to do it." Over the next few weeks, James set his plan in motion. He hired local builders and craftsmen to repair homes, renovate the shops, and rebuild the school. His once ailing village was beginning to bloom again, and with it, the spirits of its people. "I don't want anyone to struggle the way we did," James told his family one evening. "If I can give them a chance to build something better, I will." His father, Robert, nodded approvingly. "You've got a good heart, James. But just remember, don't give so much that you forget to take care of yourself." The days were long, but James found joy in seeing his village thrive again. The old jokes returned to the village square, and laughter echoed through the streets once more. James realized that wealth wasn't just about personal success, it was about lifting others up, too. "It feels like we've won the lottery," Emily said one afternoon, watching the newly painted buildings shimmer in the sunlight. "But without the numbers, just pure heart," James replied with a grin. Chapter 7: The Winds of Change. While rebuilding Harwood, James had to confront something he hadn't anticipated: the expectations that came with wealth. People, even in his beloved village, began to see him differently. Some treated him with a newfound reverence, while others grew distant, as though his success had created a divide. It was an unexpected consequence of his fortune, one that weighed heavily on his heart. "I didn't come back to be treated like royalty," James confided in Thomas one evening. They were sitting by the river bank, skipping stones, just like they used to as kids. "I came back to be the same old James, but it feels like everyone's seeing me as someone else." Thomas, ever the practical one, gave his brother a knowing look. "That's because you're not the same, James. You've changed, and that's not a bad thing. But people have a way of putting you in a box and forgetting that you can grow beyond it." James nodded slowly, letting the words sink in. He hadn't anticipated how hard it would be to balance his success with staying true to himself. The laughter that had once come so easily seemed harder to find now. "Maybe I need to remind them who I really am," he said with a smirk. "A man who can still tell the worst jokes in town." That evening, James hosted a village gathering, inviting everyone to the newly refurbished hall. He stood at the front of the room, grinning from ear to ear. "Now, before we start, I've got a joke for you," he announced. The crowd groaned in anticipation. "What do you call a rich man who can't laugh?" "Bored. And I'm not about to be that guy." Laughter erupted, and for a brief moment, the old James, the one who made everyone laugh no matter the circumstance, was back. It was a reminder to the village, and to himself, that despite his success, he hadn't lost the essence of who he was. He was still James Beaumont, the boy who dreamed big and loved to make people smile. Chapter 8: New Opportunities, Old Roots. With the success of rebuilding Harwood under his belt, James found himself receiving offers from all over the region. Businessmen from the city who had once dismissed him were now eager to work with the self-made millionaire. "You're a hot commodity, James," Mr. Finn wrote to him one day. "Seems like everyone wants a piece of the Beaumont magic." Despite the enticing offers, James felt torn. He had achieved more than he ever imagined, yet something kept him rooted in Harwood. He spent long hours contemplating his next move, but no amount of wealth or opportunity could pull him away from the love he had for his family and village. "I'm not chasing the world anymore," he said to his mother one evening. "I've got everything I need right here." Marie smiled, brushing a hand through his hair, just as she did when he was a boy. Success doesn't mean leaving everything behind, James. It means carrying it with you, wherever you go. James took those words to heart. He began to see his fortune not as a way to escape his roots, but as a way to strengthen them. Instead of chasing bigger deals in the city, he focused on investing in Harwood, helping others find their own paths to success. He started a scholarship program for young people, encouraging them to follow their dreams, just as he had done. One day, a young girl from the village approached him. "Mr. Beaumont, how did you do it? How did you go from nothing to everything?" James smiled, kneeling down to her level. "I didn't go from nothing," he said gently. "I always had everything: a love, laughter, and a family that believed in me. The money, that was just a bonus." Chapter 9, Challenges of the Heart. Despite his success in business and his efforts to rebuild Harwood, there was one aspect of James' life that remained incomplete: love. He had been so focused on providing for his family and making something of himself that he had never made time for matters of the heart. But as he approached his 30th birthday, James began to realize that something was missing. One evening, while attending a charity event in the city, James met a woman named Isabel. She was intelligent, kind, and had a sharp wit that rivaled his own. "You've got a good head on your shoulders," she remarked after a spirited debate about economics. "But do you ever let your heart take the lead?" James laughed, caught off guard. "My heart? I think it's been in the passenger seat for most of my life." Isabel smiled knowingly. "Maybe it's time to let it drive." Their connection was immediate, and for the first time, James found himself thinking about a future that wasn't just about work and success. Isabel challenged him in ways he hadn't expected, pushing him to see the world beyond business and wealth. "There's more to life than numbers and deals, you know," she teased one evening. "Sometimes the best investments are the ones you make with your heart." James found himself falling for her, but he was cautious. His wealth had changed the way people saw him, and he didn't want it to affect his relationship with Isabel. One night, over dinner, he decided to be honest with her. "I need you to know that I didn't always have this," he said, gesturing to the luxurious surroundings. "I come from a small village, from a family that barely scraped by. And that's still a big part of who I am." Isabel looked at him thoughtfully. "James, I don't care about where you come from or how much money you have. What matters is who you are, and from what I can see, you're someone who's never forgotten where his roots are." Chapter 10, The True Measure of Wealth. As the years passed, James' life became a balance between his love for Isabel, his family, and his continued work in Harwood. He and Isabel eventually married, and together they built a life that was grounded in love, laughter, and a shared commitment to helping others. "We may not be the richest couple in the world," Isabel would say with a wink, "but we've got more than enough." James continued to invest in his village, creating jobs and opportunities for the people who had supported him from the beginning. Harwood had become a place where dreams could flourish, and James was proud to be part of its transformation. "We built this together," he would often say at community gatherings. "And we'll keep building as long as we've got each other." One day, as James sat by the river with his father, now frail but still full of wisdom, Robert turned to him with a smile. "You've done well, son. Better than I ever imagined. But do you know the real reason why?" James shook his head, curious. "Why, Dad?" Robert's smile deepened. "Because you never forgot who you were, or where you came from. Riches don't define a man, his heart does." James nodded, feeling the truth of those words. In that moment, He realized that his journey from a poor boy in a tiny village to a successful man wasn't just about achieving wealth. It was about staying true to himself, to his family, and to the people he loved. As the sun set over the village of Harwood, James Beaumont knew that he had found something far more valuable than money. He had found a life rich in love, laughter, and the bonds that no amount of wealth could ever replace. And that, he knew, was the true measure of success.